Good morning. Welcome to the breakfast meeting here on NBS Television. I am Isabella Tugume. It's always a pleasure to catch up with you. The month of October is first coming to an end, but also as we close this particular month, the conversation on oil and mining continues. Now, as we look forward to the developmental phase of the oil and gas sector, all players at every level will be required to meet international standards in their particular line of work. Now, these standards will apply to welders, will apply to drilling engineers, pump services, food and beverages, heavy lifting, electricians, construction, mechanical repair workshops, among others, while some standards will be cutting across all the sectors. So this morning, our conversation will be pertaining to the standards required so that you can participate in the oil and mining sector. Joining me this morning for a broader and more detailed conversation in this regard is Ms. Jackie Lwanga, the Health, Safety and Environment Manager at SCS Global, and Mr. John Traze, the Senior Standards Officer at the Uganda National Bureau of Standards. Good morning, sir. How are you today?
Good morning. How are you, madam?
Hello, Ms. Jackie.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm happy to be here.
It's our pleasure to host you. I could tell you're really excited about it.
Yes, I love health and safety.
Yeah, all right. We love having you, and welcome to the studio. All right, Mr. Traze, I'll start with you. As the standards body of Uganda, what are some of the standards that local players should be aware of in their line of operation that are required in the oil and gas sector?
Okay, thank you very much. I'll start by maybe telling you what a standard is. A standard is basically a document. Of course, we need to understand a document that provides characteristics, okay? Requirements. When I talk about requirements, it comes. It also provides for, specifications to ensure that a product, process, it can be a process or material, meets what they call requirements. Okay, so basically, once we know what a standard is, then we can talk about what standards are required.
Okay.
Now, in terms of the oil and gas sector, you see the way it is structured. There are those, what they call services, and these services are at various categories or levels. Let me give an example. There are those they call direct services, for those who have the specialists. There are those what they call indirect services, but also induced. And I'll start with the induced. For instance, the induced ones, I want to supply tomatoes, or I want to supply bananas to, to the camps. But the question is, the one I'm supplying to who gives me a contract is telling me that you're supposed to fulfill certain things, which I have said are requirements. And basically, this is what we're talking about. Requirements are basically as per regulation. Specifications are basically, let me say, for instance, the tomato itself. The tomato will be of this shape, of this color. It shouldn't be rotten. So these standards are available. You said international standards. As a country, we adopt or we adapt. Adoption means there is a standard that is already existing at ISO. ISO means International Organization for Standardization. So this standard is already existing. Once it's already existing, we don't need to come up with our own, national standard. We adopt that standard because the beauty with that is that everybody, whether you are within Uganda or outside Uganda, your local company, the requirements given in that document are just, the same. So basically, these standards already, we have standards for our, small companies to participate. And what I would like to say, they don't create barriers. By barriers, what I'm saying is that if I'm supplying tomatoes, the requirements given in the standard allow me to, ably fulfill the requirements. They don't put barriers. They don't prevent me from supplying my tomatoes. So basically, That's what I can say. The standards, we have them. They are already Uganda standards.
All right. I'll go on to Jackie to kindly help us understand what are some of the standard practices that are highly considered when awarding contracts in the oil sector that many companies usually take for granted.
Okay, thank you very much. The first one is ISO 9001, which is the latest version is 2015. This only looks at customer satisfaction. So you clearly need to understand the customer requirements and make sure that at the end of the day, you have a satisfied customer. So everything that you do in between, whether you're purchasing, you purchase products that will give an end product that meets customer requirements. Whether you're recruiting, you've got to recruit competent people who will be able to deliver and have a satisfied customer. So that is usually like the very minimum for getting into oil and gas. It's like the foundation. And then there's ISO 45001. The latest version is 2018. That one strictly looks at occupational health and safety. So as you're delivering the service or the product, you have to make sure that your workers are not taken ill or injured while at work. There are no amputations. You don't have any fatalities. It also protects your assets, your property, as you're delivering the service. And then the other one that we also use in oil and gas is ISO 14001. The latest version is 2015. That one only looks at environmental protection. So as you're meeting customer requirements and having a satisfied customer, as you're protecting your employees and your assets, you also need to protect the environment. Now, those, like he said, there are requirements which are international standards. So the same standard, in Japan is the same one here, and it cuts across all industries. So yes, it's for oil and gas. It's the same for manufacturing, service industry. It's the same standards. Now, there are also sector-specific standards, like you're going to deliver food, you're going to handle food at the camp. So you need ISO 22000, which is for food safety. So that will give the client satisfaction that, your handling of the food meets international standards. If you're going to deliver an IT service, there's ISO 27000, which is for information security, to make sure that hackers will not hack into the system you're giving them. There are also other sector-specific ones, like for the guys doing the lifting equipment, certifying it, certifying the operators. You need LEA certification. That is, in a nutshell, you need to have all those standards in place. But again, in addition to that, because when you go to collect the tender documents, the specifications will be there. The standards that you must comply to will be clearly specified. If you're going to acquire land, like we're doing right now for the pipeline, you need to follow the IFC guidelines, that is International Finance Corporation. So performance standard number 1 is for risk management. That looks at health and safety, environmental protection. Then there's performance standard number 5, which is for resettlement. You don't just go and resettle people. You've got to comply also to the IFC standards. Also, we're going to relocate the graves, the shrines, we've got to follow IFC performance standard number 8, which is for cultural heritage. People have their rituals. You can't ignore them because, you need to work and deliver a project. You've got to take all these into consideration. So I know, from experience, many contractors want to get into oil and gas. So they look at the specification. The scope is usually 2 pages, but then the requirements are that big. So what they normally do is, they go and pick up a risk management procedure from somewhere, bring an emergency management procedure from somewhere else, look at incident investigation from somewhere, and put together, such as it has clearly said, these are specifications, these are requirements. Yeah. So when you go bringing in, different procedures from elsewhere, in the end, they ask you for evidence. Let's have a look at your incident, management, which incidents have you investigated in the past? Can we have a look at the evidence? They carry out due diligence. So it's like somebody cheating on their CV. You say you have something and you don't have it. I don't know if they'll trust you in future, but what happens is they'll ask you for your accident statistics for the last 3 years, first aid cases, near-miss cases, and you have nothing. Or when you lie, next time you'll even forget what you said the other time. So sometimes, we shoot ourselves in the foot. You're supposed to have a change management procedure. changes bring a lot of risks into the environment, but how do you manage those changes? So it is all, working to international standards and managing risks, most importantly, in a very efficient manner. By having the international standards that Mr. Chaze has talked of, you operate but efficiently. You reduce, your losses, your costs, so you're able to save money, and it is for improvement, continued improvement of the organization. You're not really doing it for oil and gas. You need to have these standards as an organization yourself.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, too. Mr. Chaze, has UNBS harmonized the operational standards to avoid double certification for local players, given that the oil industry here has both international and local players?
Yeah, thank you very much. One thing I would like to tell you is that as UNBS, we are a member to what they call the International Organization for Standardization. That organization called ISO, ISO means in Greek equal. Equal meaning that as Uganda, you can participate in standards development. There is also America. There's also Britain, Saudi Arabia, whichever country. Meaning that when we are developing a standard, it's one. It's one. You put forward your interests as a country. You agree through consensus, and that makes a standard. And that process is always very open for any party, for any company, organization interested to put forward their interests. Now, in terms of that issue of harmonization, once that happens, like my partner has explained in one or the other, is that you reduce many things. But one of the issues is, like I said, is barriers. This is an area where you know that there are issues related to trade as well. Trade here means between countries or at a global context. Okay? Actually, we follow what they call the World Trade Organization, SPS/TBT agreement. And one of the issues inside, it's saying there should not be barriers. Now, once that happens at international level, what happens at national level? Like I said, to begin with, we adopt. Adopt means you take a document as is. Once you've participated, then here you adopt it. Becomes what they call a Uganda standard. Yes. Or it's nationalized, but with the same. Now, that gives an opportunity for our local companies to participate. And that means it's just the same standard. You will not have any, sometimes I know there are complaints, but you may not have someone saying that, that standard is only favoring foreign countries. So we've gone ahead to adopt those standards. In terms of harmonization, at local level, we don't harmonize. Really, when we adopt, but we only do harmonization in the region. Let me give you an example. This pipeline is running between Uganda and Tanzania. That means that if we apply standards, Tanzania should have their own standards and Uganda their own. But harmonization means as a region or a regional bloc or economic bloc, we sit together and ensure that the requirements are the same. So that means everybody within the region can ably come in. It's a level playing ground. So in terms of services, like I just gave an example of tomatoes. But even for the pipeline itself, if it is an ISO standard, Tanzania will just do the same as Uganda. So basically, that is the harmonization. It gives room. It allows any sector player or interested party. And I would like to briefly just talk about these players because leaving alone these multinational organizations or IOCs, let's look at our local. We have what they call consortia. We have private organization. We have those that are under civil society. So they get an opportunity to have their views, to participate. They are not knocked out. Yeah. So in essence, the harmonization is really done. It's part of what I can say, the principles. Standards have their own, guiding principles. One of them is harmonization. That one is a very big one. The other one is consensus. Don't leave anyone. So basically, in a nutshell.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chaze. Jackie, what are some of the requirements that are needed to be certified in the oil sector? And of course, what is the cost attached to it?
I've mentioned at least the main one, which is the quality management system. That one, many organizations do have a system in place, and unless it's certified, you can't tell whether it does meet requirements or does not meet requirements. So many of them, you need to have a look at what are the requirements, in the international standard, and what do we currently have in place, like a gap analysis. And just to assure everybody else, it is doable. It is very, very doable. As long as somebody can interpret the requirements, you can actually come back and implement them in your organization. So health and safety drives oil and gas. Much as you need to meet, the customer requirements and have a satisfied customer, you need to make sure that your risks are managed. Where you can mitigate them completely. Where you can't mitigate, at least bring risk to an acceptable level. You need to be prepared for any emergencies. We work in the middle of nowhere. It's very remote. Do you have a medical evacuation plan? Have you practiced it? Will it work? You've got to look at environmental protection. So there's no way, you'll be able to just help yourself anywhere or to throw out a sweet wrapper, because they all have an impact on the environment. So definitely the quality management system that needs certification, and it is very doable. It is the foundation. Once you have that, it's easy to build on the other two standards, the health and safety one, the environmental one. But people really need to be, prepared and have their systems in place. Certify them, because that is like a mark of approval. That is like proof that it does meet international standards. Nobody is just working like a briefcase company. Everybody has something in place. So for me, it's people carrying out a gap analysis, identifying where the gaps are, filling in those gaps, and then, have UNBS or any other certification body certify your system. That now will get you in, and you'll be able to comply to the oil and gas requirements as stipulated in the contract or in the tender documents by complying to those standards.
All right.
Yeah.
Mr. Chaze, how are local companies being assisted to meet these particular standards and stay competitive in the oil industry?
Okay, I'll talk about like 2 or 3 things inside there. But the first one is, I'm starting from where I stopped. The moment as a country, we are able, most especially, to participate in international standardization, that means we adopt them and they become Uganda standards. Now, once a standard is developed at ISO, what I would like to say, it is very expensive. If you're buying an ISO standard like ISO 9000, it costs something like 700,000 shillings. So imagine you're a local company, you want to get a contract, but then you're spending money on buying a standard. However, when we adopt that standard, it becomes a Uganda standard, the cost reduces by, I think, 7 times. Something between 90 to 100. It's somewhere there. It goes extremely down. That means in terms of a company that wants to get ISO certification, they can buy that standard from UNBS, because that's one of the things we do. And that is, usually I tell people that is like local or something national content, because you're helping this person. Secondly, we don't only stop at adopting standards or adapting them. The other thing we do is we further go ahead to create awareness. Awareness through sensitization, basically through training. We have training programs.
Yeah.
If I tell you the engagements we have with the regulator itself, starting from the policy, that's the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development, coming to, like PAO, Petroleum Authority, UNOC. We partner, and these standards are, sensitized to stakeholders so that they understand the requirements. Because, this is what we're talking about is technical language. But people need to understand, if I'm a person in Bulisa, and I've used the example of tomatoes, and I want to supply my tomatoes, and the contract is requiring that you comply to standards. So what are requirements? So we further go ahead to sensitize.
Yeah.
There have been many regional, sensitizations, not only in Bulisa, but even in the East, where we have participated. The other issue is, apart from that, is that, we also, in one way or the other, guide them. Because she talked about ISO 9000. So if I want to get that certification, what happens? So as a body charged with the development or implementation of standards in one way or the other, most especially those related to certifications, we also, help them in terms of what they should do. Because the issue is that it's a bit of something that is evolving. Like she has explained, ISO 9000. Before you go for it, why do you need it? Do you need it just because you want to show off that you have ISO 9000? No. There are two things. They start from the organization. It's your strategy as an organization that I want this because I want to position myself to get a contract in the sector. The other issue is sometimes it's a marketing tool. Yeah, marketing. So along those lines, we, support, we guide, okay? We guide them, we talk, how do you go? But we train, largely we trained. UNBS trains, we train many, organizations on those certification standards. ISO 9000, she has talked of 45, 14.
Yeah.
There is even another one that is sector-specific, ISO 29001. That one means, like, if I'm a driller or I'm a company that is bringing in equipment, it's sector-specific. It's like, it is a quality management system standard, but the detail is their technical requirements, which the IOC will be pointing to you. So basically, we really support, but not alone, in partnership with government and non-government organizations.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you too, Mr. Chadze. All right, Jackie, as the activity picks up for the sector, what are some of the measures that have been put in place for instance, protect the environment? And what are the contingencies for accidents such as well blowouts or oil spillages, just in case?
Okay, thank you. Before mobilizing to the field, you must have a health, safety, and environmental plan. How are you going to manage your risks? What measures have you put in place? Have you identified all the hazards? Have you brought risk to an acceptable level? So you must have all that. How are you going to communicate? Who communicates externally and internally? How do you pass on, important information to all the project personnel? How do you communicate with your client? Now, in that plan, there is also an environmental management plan. How are you going to manage the waste? All the way from our vehicles, going to the field, their emissions to the air. So can we leave very early in the morning when there's no traffic, which means we spend less time, in traffic, and we burn less fuel. When we are out in the field, Maram roads, we need to slow down and make sure we are not blowing up dust. So we are managing that. We also know that if we do not maintain the vehicles, there'll be leaks and spills. If we don't service them on time, that is where you see there's like the oil and gas standard for vehicles. So much as we have all the other international standards, oil and gas also has its own, standards that you must comply with. So the vehicles cannot be more than 5 years old or 200,000 kilometers. And this is because, first of all, the roads are bad. And also the emissions, to the air, to the environment. So we've got that, and we've got to give people water, at least 3 liters of water per day. Now, it's in the middle of nowhere. You can't throw out even a sweet wrapper. So we have bin bags in the vehicles. So everybody puts in all their waste, and we bring it back to the hotel to dispose of it properly. There's the challenge of places of convenience. You could drive for 40 kilometers because the pipeline is really remote without finding a latrine that can be used. So we've got, again, to use the community liaison people to make sure they go out and identify places that we can use. It could be in a homestead, it could be at a school, at a church, at a district, office. But we cannot just, help ourselves anywhere, because it's going to end up in the rivers, it's going to be washed off, and then it's going to be brought back into the food chain. It's going to go into the people's gardens and, be brought up into the food chain. So we've also make sure we don't service our vehicles in the field, we don't wash our vehicles while in the field. We need to protect the environment. But should spills still occur, we've got kits, and we handle that as hazardous waste. It must be disposed of by a licensed waste management company. Now, for your second question, it's how will we manage a big oil spill? Okay, the first one would be to prevent it. I wish I could say that it's impossible that it would happen, but no, definitely, looking at statistics, what is it, Mr. Chaza, is it 3 million gallons a year lost in just, in oil pipeline, leaks and spills. So we cannot 100% say it can't happen. In the very beginning, we would need to design it out. So the people who are designing the pipes, to make sure that they're protected from corrosion, they can't corrode, to make sure that they're of a good quality, that they're not going to be damaged, that they're really, good. And probably secondary containment. So the pipe, if it leaks, the leak goes somewhere else before it gets into the ground. We have to make sure that there are no people excavating right next to the pipeline, because they'll damage it. So it's got to be protected. But also, these are all preventive measures, hopefully, to keep the spills away. Preventive maintenance and inspections of the pipeline regularly to make sure that spills will not occur. Now, having done everything, accidents still happen. So what do we do? I'm going to talk from a health and safety perspective, not from a process safety engineer's perspective. So, and I hope my colleagues watching will agree with what I'm saying. Number one, we would have to switch off the system completely, turn it off so that there's no oil flowing into the pipeline. And then once we've turned it off, we'll activate our emergency procedure. We'll have done a risk assessment, and we'll have an emergency procedure for that activity. So we'll activate it. So everybody will have practiced it, drills to make sure everybody knows what to do, and will the system really work if the pipeline failed. So now we'll activate it, and we'll make sure that we clean up all the contaminated soil. Whatever is involved will be taken as hazardous waste and disposed of by a waste management company, licensed company. And then we'll fix, where the leak is coming from, that will have to be fixed. And once the pipeline is up and running, we'll have to conduct a root cause analysis, because we have a risk assessment, we have systems of work, we have inspections and checks and all that. Where did the system fail us? Where are controls lacking or inadequate? So we'll need to get to the root cause of it, and then come up with measures to prevent it reoccurring. And whatever lessons we learn, we'll share, with our colleagues in Tanzania to make sure that what happened to us here doesn't happen to them. So we always share, lessons learned from incidents. And from a health and safety perspective, that's how we would handle it. Right. Yeah, so hopefully it would, we'll manage it in an organized manner. I'm not saying it can't happen, but should it happen, we will have contingency plans. Normally what we do is we put spill kits where spills are most likely to occur. But it doesn't mean we won't put everywhere else. So we'll put them where we think, or in a reachable place whereby, you have them near, everybody has been trained on how to use them, the do's and don'ts. So, yeah, we will be able to manage. We will have our contingency plans, we'll practice them. We'll have drills, we'll make sure they work, we'll train people, and we'll have the equipment ready at the place where spills could occur. All
right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It was really lovely having both of you with us in studio today. Our conversation was pertaining to the standards in the oil sector. Of course, this is part of the 90 days of oil and mining. Our conversation will continue up until the 26th of November. Everything that you need to know pertaining to oil and gas. This morning, we're looking at how best we can harmonize local and international standards for the oil and gas sector. Of course, how best we can assist local players to meet international standards so that they too can be part of the competitive market. This is NBS's breakfast meeting. I am Isabella Tugume. We do have another session coming up shortly. Good morning.